He moved like water, but with the weight of stone. In every scene, in every silent stare, Steven Seagal became a man both feared and revered. He did not need to raise his voice to command a room. He did not need 1,000 words to make a point. Just one glance. Just one strike. That was enough. He became a myth in motion, an icon forged not from noise, but from stillness. In the late 80s and 90s, martial arts cinema had its gods, and Seagal was among them. His films, with their bone-crunching realism and quiet fury, told stories of men who walked alone, carried the burden of justice on their backs, and never backed down. For millions, he was the embodiment of strength without chaos, a figure of control, precision, power. He moved differently, he spoke less, and in doing so, he said more than most ever could. But legends cast shadows. Behind the stoic roles and fight scenes was a man rarely understood. The public saw the martial artist, the actor, the master of Aikido who could bring down a room of enemies with barely a flick of the wrist. But few saw the father. Even fewer saw the person. Fame, for all its light, can often blind those closest to it. While the world looked up to Steven Seagal, those near him sometimes struggled to find the man beneath the name. He lived in motion, always between film sets, between countries, between identities. Hollywood followed him. The tabloids chased him. His life became a headline, a performance. And in the noise of cameras and clamor, emotional distance grew like fog around him. There were families, relationships, stories untold. Yet through it all, he remained that same silhouette, a strong, silent figure standing at the edge of the spotlight. To the outside world, he was larger than life. But to a child looking up, he could feel 1,000,000 miles away. And yet, the legacy lingered. The discipline, the mindset, the way he carried himself, the way he moved through the world as though it bent around him. That presence left its mark, not just in movies or martial arts halls across the world, but in blood, in memory, in bone. Steven Seagal's legacy was never just about fights choreographed for the screen. It was about silence that roared louder than words. It was about a man who mastered stillness in a world addicted to noise. A man whose strength echoed down through generations, even if his voice did not always reach them. This is where our story begins. Not with fireworks or fame, but with the shadow of a man whose presence shaped everything that followed, especially for the one person who would one day try to step out from behind that shadow and into her own light. She was not born into silence, but she grew up inside it. Arisa LeBrock entered the world under a spotlight she never asked for. The daughter of two Hollywood giants, Steven Seagal, the brooding warrior of martial arts cinema, and Kelly LeBrock, a model-turned-movie star who lit up screens with her beauty and presence. Together, they were a power couple of the 90s. To the world, it was a fairy tale, but fairy tales rarely last long in Hollywood, and Arisa, still just a child, would become a quiet casualty of fame and distance. When the cameras stopped flashing and the marriage crumbled, the world barely noticed. Steven moved on. New films, new countries, new lives, but Arisa stayed behind. Raised mostly by her mother, she grew up far from red carpets and press tours, no movie sets, no choreographed fight scenes, just open land, the smell of horses, and the aching question that always lingered in her chest. Where do I belong? Children of celebrities are often seen but rarely known. Their last names carry weight, but their voices get lost in the noise. For Arisa, that weight pressed down in ways she could never fully explain. She carried the image of a father she barely knew, not the man in the living room, but the man on the screen. Stoic, distant, untouchable, a legend who never quite became a presence. There were no bedtime stories from him, no martial arts lessons in the backyard, just old photos, rare phone calls, and tabloid headlines that told a story she was never part of. Her father's world was built on discipline and dominance, but her world often felt like absence. She didn't want fame. She wanted a father. Her mother, strong and grounded, did her best to give Arisa a normal life. A quiet ranch, a slower pace, a space to grow without the chaos of cameras. But the silence from the other side, the missing father, The questions without answers stayed with her. It shaped her, not with bitterness but with a quiet resilience. As she got older, the name Seagal became more like a shadow than a gift. People assumed they knew her. They imagined a life of luxury, fame, and opportunity. But the truth was more complex. Her identity wasn't given to her. It had to be carved out, piece by piece, from what was missing. In every child's heart, there's a longing to be seen, not by strangers but by the people who matter most. For Arissa, that longing became a kind of scar, not loud, not dramatic, just always there. Before she was a model, before she ever stepped into a wrestling ring, Arissa LeBrock was simply a daughter, a forgotten one, and that forgotten child would one day become a force no one saw coming, not even the man whose shadow she had spent a lifetime walking beneath. There were no flashing cameras on the ranch, no velvet ropes, no designer dresses, no bodyguards whispering in earpieces or assistants trailing behind with bottled water and calls to take, just early mornings, dirt under the fingernails, the scent of hay and pine on the breeze. This was the world Arissa LeBrock grew up in, not the world her last name might suggest, but one her mother carefully built to protect her from everything the spotlight could take away. For most of the world, Kelly LeBrock was a Hollywood icon. But at home, she was something more grounded, more sacred, a mother fiercely determined to give her daughter a normal life, and normal for them meant simplicity, no staged appearances, no red carpets, just the quiet rhythms of nature and the promise of peace. But even as she fed horses or helped with chores, Arissa could feel the tension between the world she lived in and the one she was expected to belong to. People expected glitz, expected her to crave the stage, but inside, she felt the opposite, a resistance, a quiet rebellion against all of it. She didn't want the applause, she wanted truth. She saw what fame had done, how it turned her parents into images, not people. She watched celebrity culture chew up relationships, twist love into headlines, and reward masks more than honesty. And in her young mind, a deep resentment began to take root. She wanted nothing to do with that world, not its lies, not its hunger. While her classmates dreamed of being actors or pop stars, Arissa preferred solitude, books, sketches, long walks under open skies. She wasn't chasing cameras. She was chasing something more real: identity, freedom, stillness. That quiet resistance became her compass. While others ran toward the limelight, she stepped back from it, not out of fear, but out of instinct. She knew something many never figure out. Not all that shines is worth chasing. Not every spotlight warms you. Some just burn. And so, she grew up without applause. But that silence, that space, it gave her something louder than any cheer. It gave her clarity. Before she ever found a ring, before she earned an audience of her own, Arissa LeBrock learned how to walk alone. And that, perhaps, is what made her so dangerous later on. She never needed fame, which meant she never feared losing it. Arissa LeBrock did not fit the mold, and she never wanted to. In an industry obsessed with symmetry, size zeros, and filtered illusions, Arissa walked in with something they were not ready for: truth. She was bold, visibly strong, and unapologetically present. As a plus-size model, her mere existence on the runway challenged everything fashion had long declared sacred. But it was not easy. Behind the curated photo shoots and flattering interviews, there were whispers, backhanded compliments disguised as encouragement, agencies that said she had a beautiful face, but asked if she could tone down, stylists who celebrated her confidence while dressing her to hide what they called flaws. She smiled through much of it, but inside, she was at war, not just with an industry, but with herself. There were days the mirror felt like an enemy, days where the world's beauty standards seeped into her skin like poison, not because she lacked strength, but because everyone eventually bleeds under constant judgment. And yet, something shifted. While others shrank, Arissa began to grow, not in defiance, but in ownership. She took control of her body not to meet their expectations, but to understand her own, and that journey led her to something unexpected: Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. In the mats of Paragon Academy, there were no beauty contests, No flashing lights, just sweat, breath, and the raw truth of combat. Here, size did not define strength. Skill did. Mind did. Grit did. Jiu-jitsu did not care what dress she wore or what magazine had printed her name. It only asked one thing: can you survive? And Arissa did more than survive. She thrived. In grappling, she found freedom. In tap-outs, she found trust. And in every bruise, she built a new kind of confidence, one the fashion world could not take from her. Modeling taught her how the world sees women. BJJ taught her how she sees herself. She was no longer asking for acceptance. She was claiming space. Not just in front of cameras, but in a world that told her to stay small. Arissa LeBrock became her own shape, her own standard, her own fighter. And every time she stepped onto those mats, she was not just winning matches. She was dismantling every lie they had ever told her about who she should be. It began in silence. No grand declaration, no press release or Instagram reveal, just a quiet decision in the back of her mind, one she barely understood herself. While the world saw her as a model, a body positivity advocate, and a jiu-jitsu fighter, Arissa LeBrock was preparing to become something far more dangerous. A wrestler, not just someone who performed in front of crowds, but someone who bled, who trained, who sacrificed comfort for purpose. It was not glamour she wanted, it was grit. But in a world built on assumptions about who she was supposed to be, this dream felt forbidden. When she first walked into the training facility, anonymous, nervous, and wearing more questions than confidence, something inside her lit up. The air smelled of sweat, canvas, and determination. The ropes, the echoes, the impact of bodies hitting the mat. It felt like truth, raw, undeniable, like something she had been quietly waiting for her entire life. But not everyone shared her vision. Her mother, the woman who had protected her from fame's sharp edges, did not understand. "You've worked so hard to build something real," she warned. "Why would you go chasing violence?" To her, wrestling was chaos, risk, a step backward into a world Arissa had already escaped. And her father? He said nothing. No call, no message, no encouragement. Just silence. The kind that cuts deeper than disapproval. Maybe he thought she would quit. Maybe he believed the ring was not hers to enter. Or maybe he was simply not watching. That hurt more than she expected. But it also did something else. It lit a fire. Arissa was not training for the applause. She was not chasing her father's legacy or rebelling against her mother's caution. She was doing it for herself. For that young girl on the ranch who learned to be strong in quiet ways. For the woman who had survived fashion, judgment, and her own doubts. Every bump, every drill, every fall was proof that this path was hers. Unlikely, unapproved, and completely her own. The ring was not where Arissa LeBrock was expected to be, and that is exactly why she belonged there. The email came without warning. No build-up, no phone call, just a subject line that stopped her breath. WWE Performance Center. Official invitation. For a moment, she stared at the screen, unmoving. The world around her slowed. Or maybe it was just her heart, because in that instant, everything changed. It was real. The dream she had been chasing in silence was suddenly demanding her full attention. WWE, the global giant of sports entertainment, wanted her. Not because of her last name, not because of her parents, but because of her. Still, something inside her hesitated. This wasn't a win yet. It was a window, and windows close. Arissa knew what was coming. The tryout would be brutal. WWE didn't hand out contracts for charisma alone. This was a world of conditioning, character, and chaos. A test that broke more bodies than it built. And she would walk in as an outsider, a model, a celebrity's kid, a woman not carved from the typical mold. But she did not flinch. In the days that followed, her training intensified. She stopped calling friends back. She shut down her socials. She began waking up in sweat-soaked sheets at 5 a.m. and heading straight to the gym, then to the mats, then to the bag. There were no cameras, no lights, just repetition, pain, silence. Her coach noticed it, the fire behind her eyes. It wasn't for approval, it was rage. a quiet rage, one she never spoke of, but which lived behind every slam of her fist into the pads. It came from years of being underestimated, of being photographed but never really seen, of being introduced as someone's daughter, not as someone. That fury didn't consume her. It focused her, and underneath it all, a single question haunted her like a ghost. What if this really is the moment? What if the sacrifices, the doubt, the silence, what if they all led here? What if she stepped into that ring in Orlando and finally became more than a name? It was not about proving them wrong. It was about proving herself right. As the tryout date approached, she packed her gear in careful silence. No fanfare, no dramatic speeches, just the hum of a woman walking toward a cliff, not because she might fall, but because she finally believed she could fly. Arissa LeBrock was not promised anything, but when the Performance Center doors opened, she was ready to take everything. The injury came fast, the kind that does not ask for permission. One wrong step, one slip, one loud, sickening crack. She remembered the silence that followed more than the sound itself. The coaches froze. Her training partner looked away. Arissa just stared at the ceiling, as if trying to convince herself it had not happened. But it had. Her knee, swollen, red, and screaming. Within hours it was confirmed. A tear, serious enough to halt her training indefinitely, maybe longer. She sat in the locker room, laces half untied, sweat cooling into cold patches across her back, and something inside her cracked deeper than any tendon ever could. The pain was not just in her leg. It was in the phone that stayed silent when she needed someone to say, "You'll be fine." It was in the echo of her mother's warnings. It was in the ghost of her father's indifference. And it was in her own voice, whispering, "Maybe I was never meant for this." For days, she avoided mirrors, not because of the bruises or swelling, but because she couldn't face the reflection of someone who might be finished before she had even begun. People said things like, "Setbacks happen," or "You'll come back stronger." But those voices felt like lies wearing kindness as a disguise. They had not seen her train until she bled. They had not watched her rebuild herself from rejection and ridicule. They had not bet everything on a single shot, only to see it vanish in a single twist of fate. This was not a break. It was a breakdown. For weeks, the gym was replaced by sterile therapy rooms and long, empty hours. The buzz of anticipation became the dull throb of recovery. And yet, something flickered beneath the despair. It was not hope, not yet, but it was not surrender either. She began writing in a journal. Just fragments at first. Pieces of a woman trying to remember why she began in the first place. "Pain," she wrote once, "is the price of being real." The wrestling dream had broken her body, but the real battle was happening in her mind. This was no longer about becoming a WWE star. This was about becoming the kind of woman who does not give up, even when the dream gives up on her. Because somewhere, beyond the injury and the fear, Arissa still believed the fight was not over. Not yet. The phone rang at a time when she had almost stopped believing in miracles. She didn't recognize the number, but something told her to answer. A calm, measured voice spoke on the other end. "Arissa, this is Dustin Rhodes. I've heard about your journey, and I want to train you myself." Her breath caught. The name resonated instantly. Dustin Rhodes. Goldust. A legend whose presence in the wrestling world was almost mythic. She had grown up reading about his matches, watching his unique style, his charisma, the way he commanded an audience without shouting, and now, here he was, personally reaching out. For a moment, she just stared at the receiver. Could this be real? Had the universe finally decided to give her one more chance? Her pulse quickened as the implications sank in. This was not a call for casual advice. This was an invitation to stand, once again, on the precipice of destiny. The emotional weight hit her like a wave. For weeks, she had been drowning in doubt and despair, questioning her own abilities, wondering if the injury had erased all potential. But now, a legend was extending a hand. It was as if someone who had walked the same path, fought similar battles, and understood the sacrifices required was telling her, "You still belong." With every word Dustin spoke, Arissa felt her confidence rebuild itself, brick by brick. She imagined stepping into the wrestling academy, feeling the mats beneath her feet, and hearing guidance from someone who truly understood what it meant to carry the legacy of greatness. It was more than an opportunity. It was validation, the kind that cannot be given lightly, the kind that fuels determination, ignites passion, and transforms hesitation into action. By the time the call ended, Arissa was trembling, not from fear, but from anticipation. She knew this was the chance she had been waiting for, the one that could turn setback into comeback, despair into triumph. She packed her bags immediately, every movement deliberate, every thought focused on the journey ahead. This stranger's call had rekindled the fire that had nearly been extinguished. Hope, once fragile and flickering, now roared inside her with renewed strength. The path was still daunting, the stakes impossibly high, but Arissa knew one thing. She was not done. Not yet. The academy was relentless. Each day began before dawn and stretched into the long shadows of night. Arissa's body ached in ways she had never known. Her muscles screamed, her joints throbbed, and every fiber of her being begged for rest. But giving up was not an option. Not anymore. Every drill, every fall, every repetition reminded her of the journey that had brought her here. The quiet ranch where she grew up, the invisible walls erected by a father who was more legend than presence, the whispers of doubt that had followed her through childhood and adolescence. She carried all of it into the ring, and somehow it fueled her. During grappling sessions, her mind often wandered back to her earliest memories of martial arts. The precision of her father's movements, the silent discipline, the controlled power, these were etched into her muscle memory, even if their origin had been distant and emotional rather than physical. When she hit the mat now, she saw more than just the hard surface. She saw the shadow of the man who had shaped her DNA, who had unknowingly prepared her for moments like this. Pain became a teacher rather than an enemy. Every bruise and scrape was a lesson, every failed attempt a step toward mastery. But the mental blocks were harder to conquer than the physical strain. Moments of doubt seeped in, whispering, "Maybe you were never meant for this. Maybe your injuries defined you." Yet, each time the doubt crept close, she pictured her father's stoic face, the martial arts legacy that seemed unreachable, and the life she had fought so hard to claim. "Every time I fall, I see his face, and I rise again." That mantra carried her through the toughest sessions, through the moments when exhaustion made her legs wobble and her spirit falter. Her heart pounded as she grappled, sweat blurring her vision, muscles trembling, but inside her burned a quiet, unrelenting determination. She was testing limits she had never imagined, pushing her body and mind past fear and fatigue. For the viewer, every move, every stumble, every triumphant rise creates suspense. Will she succumb to the pressure, or will the echoes of her past empower her to rise stronger than ever? The answer unfolds in real time, keeping the audience on edge, heart racing alongside hers. Arissa's journey through the pain was no longer just training. It was a testament to resilience, an emotional tug-of-war that captured hearts, and a story of rising above the shadows that had long haunted her. The arena was quiet, the kind of stillness that pressed against Arissa's chest like a physical weight. This was it. Her first official showcase match under Dustin Rhodes' watchful eye. The lights cast long shadows across the mats, highlighting every bead of sweat, every anxious breath. Everything she had endured, the injuries, the relentless training, the heartbreak, had led to this single moment. Backstage, whispers circulated. Some said Steven Seagal himself might be watching, though no one could confirm. That thought alone sent a shiver down her spine. Would he see the daughter who had finally forged her own path? Would he recognize the quiet strength, the resilience, the fighter she had become? She pushed the questions aside, knowing they could distract her from the task at hand. Her opponent, equally skilled and hungry, waited across the ring. The crowd was sparse but attentive, every eye on the mats, every heart quickened by anticipation. Arissa's pulse thudded loudly in her ears. Dustin had emphasized one thing repeatedly: focus, control, and presence. Every movement, every feint, every grapple mattered. This was not just a match, it was a declaration. As the bell rang, the world narrowed. Pain and fatigue melted away, replaced by pure instinct and muscle memory. Each step, each lock, each throw reflected hours of sweat-soaked training. She could feel the ghosts of her past alongside her, the childhood spent in the shadows of fame, the quiet rage from missed opportunities, the lessons from every setback, all fueling her now. The audience leaned forward as she executed a seamless series of maneuvers, her athleticism and poise undeniable. Even without her father's direct presence, his legacy hovered in the room, an invisible benchmark against which she measured herself. Every twist and turn, every rise after a near fall, carried the weight of her journey, the story of a woman reclaiming her identity. By the final moments, it was more than just a match. It was a cinematic display of grit, heart, and resilience. When the bell rang, signaling the end, Arissa stood, chest heaving, eyes sharp, not just victorious in the physical sense, but triumphant in spirit. The quiet, cinematic tension had reached its peak, and though many details remained unseen, the rumored presence of her father, the ripple of emotions backstage, the audience felt it all. This showcase had proved what she had already known. Arissa LeBrock was no longer a shadow of legacy. She was a force of her own making, ready to step fully into the spotlight. The arena fell into an unusual hush as the opening chords of her theme music echoed through the speakers. Every note seemed to stretch, resonating with a weight far beyond sound, a prelude to something monumental. Arissa LeBrock stepped out, the spotlight slicing through the darkness, illuminating her poised, determined figure. For a moment, time seemed suspended. Every fan, commentator, and crew member held their breath, unsure of how to capture the sheer gravity of what was unfolding. Her boots struck the mat with a measured rhythm, each step a punctuation in the story she had fought so hard to write. Slow motion seemed to cloak her movements, turning a simple walk to the ring into a visual tapestry of struggle, growth, and silent triumph. The years of relentless training, the setbacks, the isolation, the quiet resilience, all of it was distilled into this single, breathtaking entrance. Commentary faltered. Words were insufficient to convey the magnitude of the moment. Yet, even in silence, a narrative spoke loudly. This was not just another debut. This was a culmination of legacy, rebellion, and self-realization. The crowd, initially hesitant, leaned in collectively, feeling the tension in the air, the gravity in her stance, the electric potential of what was about to happen. Every eye followed her as if tracing the invisible lines of her journey. In those few steps, the audience connected to her pain, her perseverance, and the quiet defiance that had carried her from the shadows into the spotlight. The cinematic pause, the deliberate pace, and the charged silence made each moment feel monumental. By the time she reached the ring, the hush had transformed into a palpable energy, an acknowledgement that something extraordinary was taking place. This was more than an entrance. It was a declaration, a first chapter in a saga that would captivate hearts and command attention. Backstage, Steven Seagal stood quietly, as he always did, a figure of unwavering stoicism, the embodiment of strength and control. For decades, he had been the icon of martial arts, the stone-faced action hero who rarely revealed even a hint of vulnerability. Yet now, in this dimly lit corridor, he could not contain it. A single tear slid down his cheek, tracing the story of a lifetime of pride, regret, and love. He had watched countless young wrestlers make their way into the spotlight, but none carried this weight, this combination of legacy, struggle, and determination. His daughter, Arissa, had stepped out not just into the ring but into a world she had chosen for herself, defying shadows, setbacks, and expectations. It wasn't flawless. Her steps were measured, her posture still a little raw, her movements carrying the tension of nerves, yet it was authentic. That rawness, that reality, cut through every barrier he had built around his heart. In that moment, the action star who had faced countless on-screen battles found himself defeated by a simple human truth, the love and pride of a parent. His subtle shake of the head, the blink of the eye, the quiet exhale, they spoke volumes more than words ever could. Every viewer witnessing this scene feels the weight of the connection, the culmination of years of absence, distance, and untold stories finally converging. This is catharsis. The audience feels it as keenly as he does. The the release, the acknowledgement, the emotional collision of legacy and love. As Stephen turns his gaze back toward the arena, one last tear escapes, a silent testament to the moment's significance. Arissa is no longer just his daughter. She is a warrior in her own right, and in breaking his composure, he allows every viewer to break with him.